Hello, everybody. This is Gene Edgerton, your host, and I've logged under Danielle Montana's name, her ID. I work here at Cultural Awareness International in the Research and Development Department, and I will be hosting today. Mercedes D'Angelo will be our presenter, and as many of you know, she's a wonderful presenter. We are going to begin the session. We are recording this, starting now. So if anybody wants a copy of this, just let us know after the session. We'll be happy to accommodate and so forth. Just to give you a little overview of WebEx, I'm sure many of you have used it, but if you have any questions, there's going to be two ways that you can do this. One is there's a hand icon on the right side of the screen where you see a panel of other icons. If you click on it, it will put the hand icon beside your name, and then we will know that you have a question or comment. Once you have spoken, please click the hand icon on that row again. It will take the hand icon away from your name. And also, you can chat questions in the bottom right-hand corner to the host or presenter. That's going to be me or Mercedes, and we will follow up with comments and so forth. If you would like to speak, please give me a minute. I will just let you know that I'm going to unmute you, and then you can speak. So that's a little overview. This session is for about an hour and a half, and then there'll be some time for Q&A and so forth. I would like to begin and say that Mercedes D'Angelo is the Director of Global Business Solutions and has worked in this industry for over 20 years. She has been with Cultural Awareness International for more than 5 years. So I'm going to hand that over to you, Mercedes, and you can begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Gene. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. We have a lovely group gathered from the New York area, Texas, Massachusetts, California, London, and Mozambique, and probably a few other places that I haven't mentioned. So welcome to all. And it looks like we have a very nice mix of corporate HR representatives as well as relocation management companies, both from the client relationship management role as well as the relocation counselors who also work directly with the expats. So I hope to make this session somewhat interactive, being that we're not all in the same place. I'm going to share a little story with you that can give you some insight into me as a person and as a presenter, which will hopefully make you feel more comfortable in participating on this webinar. As many of you know, I'm half Puerto Rican, half Iranian. I actually was experiencing culture shock in utero as my poor mother, a nice Catholic girl from Puerto Rico, moved to Iran, a Muslim country, back in 1963. And over the course of my life, I lived in Iran for 15 years. I moved several times to Puerto Rico, then to New Jersey, where I went to undergraduate school, then to Texas, then to Louisiana, then to Norway and back. So I've been through culture shock many, many times. And, you know, they say that the prophet is most misunderstood in their own home because when I was about 16 years married, and I've been married now 29 years, I just celebrated that a couple months ago, my husband, who's a good young man from, or maybe not so young anymore, from Cleveland, Ohio, Italian-American, did his first cross-cultural training 16 years into our marriage on Puerto Rico because Amoco, he was in the energy sector, as you Texans can commiserate with, the energy sector, and he did some cross-cultural training and came back after a full day of training on Puerto Rico, and he said, honey, do you know what I learned today? And I was so excited. I'm like, no, what did you learn today? And he said, well, I learned that when Puerto Ricans are really engaged in the conversation, they interrupt a lot. All these years, I thought you and your family were just rude. And, you know, it kind of hit me then. Cultural understanding isn't really intuitive, for one. And for two, you may be in it for years, in an intercultural, multicultural setting for years, without necessarily being an expat, and you can still not get it. So It also is a good story to let you know that being Puerto Rican, Middle Eastern, I encourage interruptions. I like to encourage you to, if you follow my little arrow, I hope you can see it, to raise your hand or send me a note, and hopefully I'll catch it. If not, I've asked Jean to let me know about it. And while this session isn't about cultural training, it is about risk. And cultural differences are one of the many components of risk. So let's get started. In managing expatriate risk, what I'd like to do for you today is provide you a framework for understanding the different facets that increase risk, both from an organizational perspective as well as from an individual and family perspective. I used to work for a global health and productivity company that does a lot of expat counseling. And the president of the company would always say, you know, there's no such thing as a hardship assignment. It's really a hardship assignee. That certain people, regardless of where they're placed in the assignment, it could be a cush job in New Jersey or London, will struggle more than another family put in a place like the Ivory Coast or Gabon. So let's try to understand a little bit about what are the factors that increase individual and family risk, and explore the challenges and how risk can be quantified from an ROI perspective as far as the key stakeholders are concerned. And then look at what are the strategies for mitigating risk. I mean, we can't eliminate risk completely, but we certainly, in our capacity as HR, corporate HR, advisors to HR, can put plans and programs and processes into place to make assignments more successful and to mitigate risk. And I want to specifically look, I'm going to be looking at a variety of things, but I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the concept of selection and development as it pertains to managing risk. I'm going to take a moment, because we have enough time, and just ask you if there's anything else you would like me to focus on risk. Just feel free to raise your hand. Jean will help me unmute you as needed. If you'd like me to add anything so that I can address it in the course of the presentation. I'm going to give you a second or two to think about that.
Yes, I'm going to unmute Jason.
Hi, Jason.
Excuse me, John Rosen. Go ahead, John.
No, I think it's, oh yeah, John Rayson. Hi, John. Are you on mute because we can't hear you? Have you muted yourself?
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Okay, feel free to type your question in, and I'll keep an eye out for it. We're going to continue. I'm assuming that there are no other questions. I'm sorry, John, that you're having difficulty with the audio. I'll look forward to getting your written question. So when looking at international assignments, there's an element of Russian roulette that we're playing. A very interesting lady years ago in Dallas, who I visited with, an energy company that did a lot of work in Malaysia, in Jakarta, Sumatra. She said, you know how we select our assignees? I said, no. She goes, we get in the elevator and the first person to come on gets the job. Of course, she was being sarcastic, but we do know that selection isn't really something that's done very thoughtfully from a behavioral health perspective. So there's behavioral health issues that impact success. We also know that the amount of stress that expats are feeling are significantly greater than what they're feeling at home. 65% of expats report feeling the strain of managing work versus home demands, amplified anxieties at the office, many of them due to cultural issues, but also many of them due to a significant increase in level of responsibility, as well as the pressures that the family may be feeling. In fact, we know that 67%, at least that's what the literature shows, cite family concerns as the primary reason for terminating an assignment voluntarily. And we know that culture shock, risk, as well as the risk of depression, which spill over into the workplace, impact not just the assignee, but the work team. And for those of you who are not too familiar with the impact of depression in the workplace, this is actually a real growing issue internationally, and one that from an HR perspective we have to be aware of. While I'm not going to be focusing on depression and the cost in the workplace, we know that depression in the United States alone has an annual cost of over $4 billion. We also know that the American work style is something that's being exported internationally. We know that Americans tend to be more task-oriented versus relationship-oriented. And we know that internationally, close to 90% of the cultures of the world are more relationship-oriented cultures. So overlaying an American work style in these international atmospheres adds an extreme level of stress for your local employees outside the United States. And so there's a big cost associated with that. For example, 31.9 million working days were lost in France in 2000. 13 million sick days in Britain. The economic cost in Germany was 4.025 billion euros of depression. And we know mental illness is a growing issue with limited resources for help in places like China, Korea, and all across Africa. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because it is the risk of your assignee is very closely linked to the emotional well-being and the risk of your local employees. And unfortunately, in most companies, and I'm not saying all companies, in most companies there is a kind of siloed approach to addressing global mobility and talent management, even though global mobility may fit into talent management. So we're looking at issues of the health and well-being of the assignee outside of how it's impacted within the group within which he or she may be working. And nothing is clearer than this when we look at evacuation for political unrest. Well, what about all the employees who are working there who can't evacuate, who live there? So it's a dichotomy. It's not one that we can resolve, but it increases the speed at which that roulette table turns and the chances of that ball not even landing on one of those little slots. So we may never even have a winning number. And I have always envisioned the expat as an acrobat, trapeze artist, tightrope walker. One of those real extreme sports people who are walking between the fine line between head office and the local office, and not only juggling all of the business objectives, which can often be at odds between local and head offices, but also imagine that tightrope walker with having on his or her back the spouse, the children, elderly parents, everyone hanging on to that person and expecting that person to help them adjust, assimilate, and survive successfully and happily. It's a really, really tough walk. And I see HR and also the relocation management companies as being the safety network underneath, trying to catch them, trying to get them back up on that tightrope and helping them. And we know that there are significant stakeholder issues at work. Head office has high expectations. Whether that assignee is going to start up a new manufacturing plant, whether they're going to close down an office, take on for another leader who may not have been successful, see a new product rollout. There's usually a lot of expectations tied to the success of that assignee, even if only for developmental purposes. And incidentally, one of the risk factors is also sending people on a developmental assignment without any clue as to what are we hoping to develop. How can we achieve outcomes that we want to achieve without really specifying what those outcomes are and leaving it something nebulous like developmental? It's actually really interesting. The research shows that most developmental assignments fail developmentally, and that there's a false negative associated with international assignments as a predictor of global competency. I'm not sure if that's making sense, so let me spend a second on that. So by false negative, I mean if you're reviewing a resume or trying to determine who to hire for a particular job, people will see, oh, had a foreign assignment in Switzerland for 2 years, lived in Kuala Lumpur for another year and a half. By Jove, that person must be culturally competent. And actually, there is a significant research that shows that that is not a warranted assumption. In fact, many people who go on assignment do not develop the competency levels that they should have developed. And for me, and for CAI, and hopefully for you, that is one of the risks. Why am I going to invest in sending someone on a developmental assignment and get them back without having achieved those goals? So very important. Of course, HR struggles with compliance issues, cost of the assignment, corporate reputation. You know, I remember in Texas, actually, the VP of HR for Turner Broadcasting talking about Anderson Cooper and how he was a compliance nightmare when it came to immigration. He would go wherever the problem was that needed to be reported on, often without doing the correct immigration work and spending months and months there, and HR was always trying to dig him out and get him out of trouble. So interesting story about how compliance, you know, can be such an issue. And we need to make sure that the different stakeholders, whether it's HR, the family, or the local host office, are communicating effectively about some of these issues. The family puts a lot of pressure on the assignee. There are concerns about schooling. You know, we tend not to ask questions that are crucial to supporting the assignee. In the U.S., because of HIPAA, because of the EEOC and bona fide occupational qualifications, we don't ask a lot of health and mental health-related issues that are determinants of success. A child with autism who's being relocated to a place where there are very limited resources represents a risk. A family member, especially a child, for example, with medical problems, be it juvenile diabetes, or I actually knew a family with, again, another petroleum company who was relocating with a child who had recently had a liver transplant. What are the resources locally? And I know there's a lot of support with companies such as International SOS, et cetera, but we need to make sure that the family's concerns are being addressed. And now more than ever, we have blended families, children left behind with their father while the mom and the stepdad go on assignment. Or we have people going for the wrong motivations. My wife is driving me nuts with my mother-in-law. I'm going on assignment just to get my wife away from my mother-in-law. Not necessarily the best motivating factor and the best predictor for success. Believe me, that happens. So sometimes from the family perspective, we need to look at what are the motivations behind the acceptance of the assignment. And from a local host office perspective, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how hard it can be for the local office, there's a concern about the cultural fit. There's concern about language, whereas many of your colleagues around the world may speak very strong English as a second language. There's no doubt that as the complexity of the topic increases, and as the emotional level of a topic increases, fluency decreases. And that can be a big source of strain and can also increase the risk of assignment success. And again, we have often an expat going to a local office and having a lack of understanding from corporate HR about what the limitations are in meeting the objectives of corporate HR, of corporate headquarters within the local culture. For example, we know in Latin America, we know in Asia, equally in Africa, that time takes, the time it takes to meet certain objectives is much longer. And we know these are for a variety of reasons: building trust, establishing the relationships, getting to the right decision maker takes a lot longer. Achieving consensus in collective societies takes longer. And so when that expat has the burden of meeting HQ timelines in a local office where that timeline is unrealistic, and HQ doesn't have the cultural understanding to be able to help that expat bridge the gap, again, we have a higher risk of assignment success. Any questions around this slide? The one thing I hate most about webinars is not hearing you guys or seeing your faces. So I hope you're still there. I actually have a story. I once did a webinar, but for some reason we didn't use WebEx. So everybody was on their own on PowerPoint, and they all dropped off the line. And 45 minutes later, when I finished, I realized that nobody was there. It was quite disconcerting. I had presented to the air. Any questions? No. I shall continue. So as you can see from this slide and for the previous one, the information that was shared, you know, there's a lot of pressure on the expat. Pressure to perform, pressure to appease, to meet the expectations of different people. We have pressures regarding money, regarding accountability, regarding time, regarding loved ones. The expat typically spends 13.4 hours extra a week at work on assignment than they do at home. That's what the research shows. So those are long weeks, and the family is thrown together more so than ever because they don't have additional support resources. And so this is a big pressure on the expat as well. And then we have environmental pressures, which, you know, we often don't think of. So commuting in Tokyo and getting on, you know, the subway when there's absolutely, it's all jam-packed and, you know, your personal space is being invaded. Dealing with the intense population levels in Bombay or New Delhi. Dealing with poverty. The idea of poverty, these are, and the visual impact that this has on people. Political upheaval. We certainly know a lot is going on in the Middle East with the Arab Spring and with everything else that's been going on there. We know that many places there's a lot more smoking in public places, there's poorer lighting, less occupational health and safety regulation, which creates additional stress and on the expat. So these are all things that it can impact the risk of the assignment as well. Doesn't really make you want to run out and go on assignment, does it? But we know that most expats, especially those who've been successful, think of this as the most rewarding and life-changing experience of their lives. You know, I was the accompanying spouse when we moved to Norway, to Stavanger, and it was an unbelievable experience for me. Of course, I had already had the privilege of living internationally several times, but my husband hadn't. And for me, one of the big drivers to go on assignment was him having that experience to be able to even understand me a little bit better. And it really is just an amazing experience. Can I ask you to raise your hand if you've had an international experience? If you've lived outside of your home country, click this little hand arrow right here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, Paul, you're on assignment right now, are you not? 6. Very good. Excellent. So, and I think a few more raised their hands. Thank you for sharing. And if you'd like to type the names of the countries that you've lived in, type it to me. You can select down here on the bottom, host and presenter and panelist so everybody can see. That would be great. It would be nice to know where you've been on assignment. And feel free to unraise your hand now by clicking that again. Saudi Arabia and Latvia. Wow, John. Cool. Oh, and I'm now seeing, John, I'm now seeing your question. I'm sorry. Once I start talking, it's hard to multitask. So John wants to say, do you assess mental toughness? Mental abilities, you know, that's going to fall under behavioral health, and that's certainly something that ideally should be addressed, John, and we're going to talk about that. Anybody else want to share what countries they've been on assignment at? Feel free to unraise your hand by clicking on the hand button again. So, to John's question and to other questions, when we talk about adjustments and really assimilating and being successful and having the least amount of risk on assignment, we're looking at several balls that are being juggled. And, you know, the most obvious one tends to actually be language and culture. What's very interesting is, and I've read a lot of research on this, but there was a very interesting article actually in Time magazine just 2-3 weeks ago that you may want to pick up or look for online on bilingualism, and which was really weird that the timing came right when I was going to Utah to do a presentation for the International Rockies Relocation Council. Utah is leading the nation in bilingual schools. Okay, we also have people who have been to Singapore. So we have a nice representation of international assignments, and the bilingualism is being shown as really creating an ability for people to change their thinking, create divergent thinking much more easily. And Utah is leading the nation in bilingual schools starting at a very young age, immersion schools. And interestingly enough, my two hosts, who were both members of the Church of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church, one's daughters were in Chinese immersion and the other ones were in Spanish immersion. And the article actually addresses whether there's some hidden agenda with the Mormon Church and they do a lot of missionary work. Regardless of that or not, bilingual schools are an amazing way of getting our children accustomed to doing that switching back and forth. And it's shown that people who speak more than one language have a higher ability to shift cultural work styles. And we're going to talk a little bit more about these things. So that's certainly something that you can look for when you're hiring people into your organization, that we're looking for people who are bilingual or multilingual. They're going to have probably a better chance at switching styles culturally. Also, one of the challenges of multiple assignments, many companies send people to multiple assignments, and there actually is a phenomenon known as burnout, assignment burnout. So people start feeling just really exhausted. And we're going to talk about the cycle of adaptation. If you go through that cycle of adaptation every time you go on assignment, it can really wear you down. We mentioned family concerns. I mentioned the lack of a support network. And I'll give you an example of this, which has stayed with me all these years. When I was working for that other company I mentioned to you before, a lady called in from Manila to the hotline. She said, you know, my husband didn't talk to me when we lived in Chicago, and he's not talking to me here in Manila. It wasn't a problem in Chicago because I had my mom, I had my sisters, but I have nobody here, and he just doesn't talk to me. You know, she was really upset. So certain things that we can easily deal with when we have our regular support network become intolerable when we're outside of our home. And marital problems are among the most difficult. They say the occupational hazards of international assignments are divorce and substance abuse. And that, in some countries like Saudi Arabia, can be a real big problem. So putting the right support system is crucial. Now, we have behavioral health issues as well, and, of course, physical health issues. And I'm going to refer to these again shortly. So there's a cost associated with all of this. Many years ago, one of the big, at the time 5, and now big 4 accounting companies, tax companies, had done a survey with one of their clients, Honda, and they had assessed repatriation attrition. And they had looked at it, and they had seen that, you know, obviously there's always some level of attrition, and some level of attrition is always good because not all employees are a good fit. So there are always those employees that we're not really too sorry to see leave. However, the international assignee attrition level should ideally be lower than our domestic attrition level because obviously those are people who are high performers and who we've invested a lot in to gain this international experience. So we really don't want them leaving the company and taking that customer knowledge and that international knowledge. Well, Honda and this their consulting company had done Six Sigma analysis and had measured attrition at 22% of their repatriating assignees with an annual cost of $2.6 million. And they didn't have a very large assignee population. I think it was more like 60 assignees on assignment per, at any given time. And the cost associated was, quantified through Six Sigma as not only the loss of knowledge, customer knowledge, international competency, but also the cost of bringing someone on new, retraining them, et cetera. And we know that there's on-site failure, the brownouts, the people who do the time but don't necessarily are successful on assignment. And we know there's other costs as well that lead to a loss of financial issues. When we talk about health problems, can I ask a question? And again, raise your hand if you have clients or if you're corporate HR and you do a full medical assessment of the expat and family before going on assignment. Raise your hand if you have clients that do it or if you yourself do it. And I hope you can all see this. So you guys, there's a couple of you who do it. And I'm sure for those of you like Karina who are working with a relocation company and Jay, who I believe are representing Weichert and Xerox relocation management companies, I would guess, and keep your hand raised, Jay and Karina, if you feel like the majority of your clients do them. Otherwise, put your hand down. Somebody else seems to have raised their hand or put their hand down. Okay. I am always shocked. When I was with Amico, which is currently BP, I was a trailing the accompanying spouse. We had major physicals done, drug tests, physicals. I know some of our clients do drug tests. And the physicals that were associated included lung capacity, everything from, the strength of our hearts. And, it was very in-depth for the assignee and spouse, because in many countries the resources are limited and chronic pre-existing problems can be very, very dangerous, especially if people don't know and don't take the right amount of medication, et cetera. Also, we have had many situations where people have developed acute illnesses during assignments, or people have gone knowing that they are in cancer treatment. certain conditions in certain countries, for example, pollution in certain countries, make things like asthma a very dangerous disease to have to go on assignment. So these things need to be assessed. Yeah, there are some legal issues associated with them. You know, one of the things that we found both on the behavioral health and on the physical health side was that assessing the behavioral and physical health and having that conversation with the assignees, in most cases, the assignee would recognize the need to exclude themselves from the assignment. And therefore, the company can sidestep some of the legal issues associated with HIPAA or other safe harbor example and other legal disclosure issues, compliance issues. From a behavioral emotional health, again, there are undisclosed illnesses that people have that they don't share. For example, someone may be bipolar, may be on medication, and may not have any issues at all. But upon going on assignment, if they're not connected with the right physician or therapist, their medication may run out, and then it can really escalate into a significant problem. I'm going to talk about this when I do the cycle of adaptation, but there are exacerbations of illnesses due to culture shock. So, for example, a teenager who may have in the past had eating disorders, which are controlled, when going through culture shock may have a recurrence of an issue like that. And then, of course, there are lifestyle risk issues, such as teenagers experimenting with drugs. In certain countries, that could be totally deadly. The repercussions could be huge. Also, you know, people who have maybe had prior substance abuse problems, even if it's, you know, alcohol abuse, may, you know, with the stressors of assignment, find themselves again in a very difficult place. So really, what we're looking at is looking at an assignment from 4 critical perspectives. So the one obvious one is physical health and safety and security. Those are the 2 clear ones. And I think the companies tend to be more comfortable in dealing with safety and security. We know there's a lot of companies that do safety training, kidnap and ransom insurance. There's travel medicine, travel monitoring. There's evacuation plans and evacuation vendors. That's really well handled for most companies. Let me ask you, raise your hand if you have clients who do not address any of these things. Yeah, my experience is, I guess, similar to yours. It's the first thing, and it's standard of care and duty of care. So it's, you know, really handled well. I actually, when I was in Utah doing this presentation, there was a lady there from, I wish I remember the company name, who did a presentation on immunizations. And I didn't even know that they had immunizations regarding dengue fever. I had the dengue when I was about 19 living in Puerto Rico. Oh, my God. Ugh, horrible. So immunizations are also another part of that physical, you know, kind of screening and preparation. But the 2 areas in my experience that get less attention are global competency and behavioral health. I think behavioral health is just too almost embarrassing to even talk about, unfortunately. And we know that the reasons assignments fail is not because they're not good at the functional responsibility. It's because they can't make the cultural fit or because the family can't succeed. So global competency development and behavioral health are the 2 areas where I personally feel leave a lot of room for improvement. And I know that we have we work with all of you that are on this call, and I know we do cultural training for a lot of you. I want to give a shout out personally to Boston Scientific because they do such a great job. Diane and Paul, I hope I'm not embarrassing you too much here, but they do such a great job with the Director of Global Mobility, Judy Pellucci, of not only providing the right training and development, but also really providing it on the way back home and tracking attrition. And they've, over the last few years, Judy and I did a presentation in Boston a year or two ago, a really impressive way of reducing the level of attrition that they've had. So kudos to them for that. And, you know, they might be willing to share some of their thoughts on that at some point during this conversation. So language training tends to happen. Cultural competency, unfortunately, is not happening as much as one would think. In fact, John, I don't know if this was Interdine or Santa Fe or both, but there's a survey that was done that said that only about 38% of the 1,000 plus companies surveys indicated that cross-cultural training was included in their typical assignment. Only 37% of 1,000 companies. Many companies don't include the spouse. We personally recommend including the spouse even for the business portion, because when the assignee comes home and is frustrated from a tough day at the office, who does he or she speak to but the spouse? And the spouse can be a wonderful sounding board and remind them of some of these things. And we know that the number in Europe drops even lower, the number of people getting trained. And I experienced this myself when I did a lot of work in Switzerland and Belgium and London in my former life. And with our European-based companies, that the assumption is because of the Euro zone and the European Union, and because of the fluid transfer back and forth across borders, that people are more culturally competent. And again, we're seeing that that's a false negative. So here's an area where you can do a little bit more coaching for your clients, whether you're an HR business partner or a relocation management company. It's not intuitive again, and something could be done to better support them. And the other concern I have to add on this level is ongoing coaching and support. So cultural competency is not events-based. It doesn't happen with 1 or 2 days of training. It really happens over a course of a lifetime. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So how do we mitigate the risk and sustain the skills that are related to culture over the course of the assignment? So most of you have probably seen this. Let's see if I can color my thing so that you can see it better. Apparently not. I hope you can see my arrow. So we know from the moment that someone gets into your office and says, "Hey, Valeria, congratulations, Jolene, you've been picked to go on assignment to Kuala Lumpur. We need you to make a decision within the next 6 weeks. It's a great opportunity for you. You're going to be running our Asian HR based out of there. We really recognize the phenomenal job you've been doing here, and we think that you would be fabulous there. Oh, by the way, did we mention we're cutting back and downsizing? But if you take this assignment, there's not going to be any fear for you. You won't have to worry about your assignment at all, your tenure with the company at all. This is a 3 to 5 year assignment. We are sending you and your family. We expect you to actually make the move. Let us know in 2 weeks whether you accept, and you're moving in 6 weeks. So you get on this roller coaster, and of course it's that gradual, oh my God, they've recognized what a hard job I've done, what a great job I've done, how much time and effort I put in. This is a phenomenal opportunity. And I know that package, that cost of living allowance and that hardship allowance, that's going to be a nice little nest egg to help little junior with college, maybe even retirement nest egg. Oh my God, what about my husband's job? What's he going to say? But you know what? We can travel the world from there. We can see so many things. Oh, little Sheila is going to flip out if she can't do senior year at school. What am I going to do about her? And up and down, on and on. And if you have elder parents, family members with illnesses, what about your best friends? There's a lot going on. And once you go home, everyone's going to get on that roller coaster. Nobody's going to be attached. And while you're feeling really pumped up about this assignment, your spouse or partner may be feeling really unpumped up and very upset. Similarly, the children might be saying, "You're ruining my life." I remember that one. And so this is a critical point of intervention because people aren't really deciding to go on assignment for the right reasons. They're deciding because the compensation might be really good. They're deciding because they want to get little Sheila away from that biker boy she's been dating. Tons of reasons why they're not making the right choice. And from a corporate perspective, this is where the company is at risk of sending the wrong person on assignment. And then again, people do the 2.7 million things they have to do to get packed, sell their house, and walk out the door. And I remember that point sitting on the plane and going, oh my God, I didn't even have a key in my pocket. I was just so excited with the kids. I had 3 kids, and I was pregnant with my 4th. Going to Norway, you get there, and the honeymoon period for me didn't last way too long, partly because I was pregnant. My husband, poor man, says that I went through culture shock and postpartum depression at the same time, bless his heart. But we usually say take all your pictures during the honeymoon period, which is right about here. Let's see if I can get my arrow back. Oh, saying Danielle. Yeah, well, thank you. The honeymoon period. And so this is a time where everything's very exciting, and it can last anywhere between a couple weeks and to a couple months. But gradually, we have this downward spiral that occurs. Let me see if I can show you. As people start trying to navigate the cultural differences and do things. I remember my husband coming home once from work and saying, we called a meeting at 3 p.m. It was a 2-hour meeting, and at 4 o'clock, all the Norwegians stood up and left the office. And when we were questioned, they said the workday ends at 4. You Americans work to live. We Norwegians, you Americans, excuse me, live to work. We Norwegians work to live, and 4 o'clock is time to go home. I want to get across country skiing before it gets, too dark. And there's 3 outcomes when people get to this point. One is they pack their bags and come home. The other is that they actually, stay throughout their entire assignment at this level of functionality and energy and emotion level. They're the ones who stay very cocooned into their local expat group. They never make any friends. I remember parties where there were no locals invited to the going away party. I'm like, seriously? You've been here for 4 years, and there's not one Norwegian who's sad to see you leave? Now, that doesn't really say much about your assignment. And then ultimately, the best results are those people who start getting it and start feeling really great about it and make a lot of friends. And they develop the relationships and the competencies that are going to help the organization be successful for years after their assignment has ended. And they come to see that assignment as home. This is my new home. My kids love it. My spouse loves it. I love it. I've got great friends. And then they get the email or the call that says, hey, your assignment's almost up. It's time for you to start thinking about coming home. And then we start our first dip on the roller coaster again. Many times there is no assignment to come back to. People need to find an assignment. There's a lot of up and downs. And people come home, again, have that honeymoon period. Mine ended when I walked into the grocery store. I was like, oh, my God, why are there so many peppers and cereals to choose from? I can't handle this. It's too much. Living in temporary housing, I remember, with 4 kids and white carpeting and a dog. very difficult. But more importantly, you know, humor aside, you've had this life-changing experience that people don't really get. And people have also changed. Things have changed at home. And you're coming back with a different perspective about what your home country is. I remember, you know, when we were on assignment, it was during the Bosnian War, and we really got exposed to what Europeans were thinking about us as a nation, and it gave us a different perspective. We still loved our country, but we understood that people were feeling things and interpreting things differently. Then you come back home, and so you are a different person, and people are confused by you. And if you gain any cultural skills, you may have become a little bit more collective. You may have become a little bit more hierarchical, depending on where you were working. And now people are like, what's wrong with Joe? What's wrong with Mercedes? What's wrong with Nancy? What's wrong with, you know, Glynis? Why are they acting so differently? And so these are the things that can send us back into another downward spiral called reverse culture shock. And here's where you stand to have, again, a couple of bad outcomes. One, attrition. The highest levels of attrition are going to be within 2 years about coming back. People have this life-changing experience, and a lot of times they're coming back to a domestic role. They were the big fish in the little international pond, and now they're the small minnow at the big corporate, you know, ocean. And it's a tough adjustment to make. But for those who stick it out, and especially those who get a little bit of coaching and support along the way, they make their way back up and they hit the ground running. So again, we have here critical points of intervention that need to be addressed. And once they're addressed, the company is able to compress the extreme highs and lows to make this cycle a little bit less risky for the organization. What do you think? Any thoughts? Would anybody like to share any concerns or questions? We can unmute you and take a moment. Okay. I'm scanning. I don't see that anybody really wants to say anything. If you change your mind, please let me know. I know half of you are multitasking. I can see that. But don't worry, I do the same thing. So look, here we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I know you HR folks are so familiar with this. And I love pointing this out because what makes your expats insane? It's not self-actualization. It's down here, destination services, finding housing, getting the kid in school, making sure that we know how to get to work, got that driver's license, got that social security number. Those basic needs for survival become the most important issues. But the thing is that we really want the expat to be focused up here, you know, on cultural competency, on how to really self-actualize while on assignment. And so if you look at this and you kind of, whoops, I'm hitting the wrong button here, you kind of transpose this onto that cycle, you'll see that there's a very interesting fit, that people will actually only be able to focus on those things once they have gotten rid of this part of the problem. And I think that's kind of really interesting thing to think about. And you take a minute and look at this slide, and you can, I think, visualize how culture shock and reverse culture shock really impact the cycle of adaptation and the ability of that assignee to focus on the actual job and more intrinsic rewards of being competent and successful. Yeah, you know, John, you make a very good comment about cultural training and the survey. something that I actually didn't mention, but you're absolutely right about, which is that, you know, a lot of assignees don't take the offer for cross-cultural training. You know, oh, I traveled there for the last year. I really get it. I don't need it. First of all, their family always needs it, and we know kids need it too. We do youth training, as you all know. But the other thing is that this cycle, people feel this cycle very differently when they travel versus when they relocate. And interestingly enough, the literature and the research shows that it takes about a third of the assignment to get to this point right here in the middle, your deepest throes of culture shock. And it could take, you know, up to 2/3 of the assignment to get to this point. So, you know, you're thinking, you know, a year to a year and a half of the assignment spent trying to move up that cycle. It's surprising that knowing that people don't make it mandatory. So really, we have a very high conversion rate for cross-cultural training, and I really think it's due to the phenomenal job that our global assignment coordinators do and our intercultural solutions department does in training them to have that conversation with the assignees. So we ask our RMC partners to let us be the ones to talk to the assignee because we understand culture and we're able to talk to them and give them a real deeper understanding of why it's important for them. Because many times they don't get it, and that really helps. So John, thanks for pointing that out. Interesting information from Mercer. Assignment failure, which I think is the ultimate risk. 56% said that the business objectives weren't met, and we know now why a lot of those reasons are. Problems in the host country, 49%. 39% say there's an early return of the assignee, and I find that most companies do a really, really inadequate job of measuring that. Part of it is just because it's so hard to face up to. Many companies don't really even define what it is. And again, it's hard to know whether career development objectives are met when you're not really very clear as to what those are. I thought it was really interesting to see, and now this is Mercer's 2010 results. Unfortunately, I don't have anything more recent, but I know they did come out with one, and I think it was last year, and those of you who work with Mercer can ask for it directly yourselves. But I found it interesting to see the difference, and I'm not sure why Japan isn't included in Asia-Pac, but poor candidate selection is right up there, regardless of the region. And I think it's just really, really curious for me, and I don't know if you guys have an opinion of your own, why people are admitting that they don't do good candidate selection, yet they're not investing in it. And I'm not sure even investing in actual, you know, an assessment protocol so much as, you know, investing in understanding what's required, what are the predictors of success, and how can we developmentally help our assignees prior to even getting to that point where they are selected for assignment. Does anyone want to share anything about that? Because I want to go into selection right about now. What's interesting is that the three most important selection factors identified are skills and job competency, job performance, and job level. Yet we know that the behavioral issues and the cultural competency issues are the ones that really determine success, yet they're not being selected upon that. And again, you know, every time I go to SHRM, and I just recently presented both at SHRM's annual conference and at their talent management conference this year, it's just astounding how much HR wants to be at the table. And I know that the clients I have here, you know, I know Sherry, you're on the phone. I know Microvention and Boston Scientific are at the table, but so many other companies, HR finds out way after an assignment decision is made. They're not brought into it. And we can see here that the numbers, are pretty low. Only 1/3 of companies are really getting HR proactively involved, and that's a shame. So how do we get to the table? And I think part of it is having that conversation about with senior management about risk. What is the risk, and what do we stand to lose? And we really do stand to lose a lot. So I'm going to spend the last 30 to 40 minutes of the conversation, and I don't know if you can hear the pecking, but there's a woodpecker pecking on my walls. So I apologize for that. I want to talk about managing risk. I see it as really doing a downhill ski, and the risk associated with, not necessarily being a professional skier and doing that downhill at really high, fast rates. So we know that that really, if we had to summarize in 4 key personality dimensions for adaptation and assignment success, and this goes to the very seminal research and validity study that was done by Colleen Kelly and Judith Myers, who are both PhDs, years ago, over 25 years ago, is still valid today. With emotional resilience, my ability to pick myself up and bounce back when I make a mistake, huge determinant of success. Your ability to laugh at yourself. We know that flexibility and openness are really important predictors of success. People who are very rigid do not do well on assignment. And this is probably one of the hardest things to train and develop. Train people to be flexible and open to new things. Another really important feature is perceptual acuity. So that means how clearly are you looking at yourself and at your surroundings? Are you able to see your strengths as well as your weaknesses? Are you able to actually see that your behavior is not getting the results that you want? Are you able to see, especially if you're a Latina Middle Eastern like me and you're operating in an Asian environment, are you able to discern and read between the lines that you are possibly offending someone? Perceptual acuity is vital. You can train on perceptual acuity. So understanding that issues such as face saving, face giving, and losing face are really crucial, not only in in Asian countries, but also in Latin American countries, certainly in Middle Eastern and African countries. Very important. How we communicate, if not done culturally appropriately, can really impact our success on assignment adversely. And personal autonomy, the ability to make decisions, to have a confidence to find solutions. These are really, really important things. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work that Paula Caligiuri, PhD, has done while she was heading up international HR at Rutgers University. She's at Northeastern now. She would just receive an endowed chair, and she wrote a really interesting book. If you're interested in learning more about that, shoot me an email. I'd be happy to send you some information about her book. But the research has shown that the big 5, okay, I don't have a slide on this, so if you want to jot it down, I'll go slowly. So the big 5 are extroversion. Extroverts tend to do a little bit better on assignment. Agreeableness. The ability to find a workable solution, not to take things too personally, and to just be agreeable is actually one of the big 5 personality traits that are found in expat. I mentioned openness. It comes up again. Flexibility, it comes up again. And conscientiousness. And this is based on the 2004 study, which was correlated with leader effectiveness. So international leaders, multicultural leaders, their success are based on extroversion, agreeableness, flexibility, openness, and conscientiousness. And what's really interesting is that the studies show that there's this trait called career effectiveness, which is basically the people who are most successful on assignment, who have the lowest risk, and who developmentally make the most gains on assignment are people who have this career effectiveness piece, which is they've always wanted to go international, always, from day one. They've always wanted to go eat foreign food, watch foreign films, travel internationally. They're reading books written by, other writers, not necessarily only U.S. top sellers. There's this desire. They're the ones who go on, what's it called, semester abroad, et cetera. So these are things that you can start checking for when you're bringing new people into the organization. Certainly something to look at. But the four scales here on this slide that come from the cross-cultural adaptability inventory are related to a self-assessment that people can take to see where they fall within the range. It's like a 40 or 50 question, I think it's a 50 question questionnaire. It can be done online. It can be done paper and pencil. And it's really a way of the assignee and the spouse to just start talking about whether they're interested. It's not a hard, yes, go on assignment, no, don't go on assignment. It's really the way I like to see people use it, and it's used in a variety of ways, is as a way to start having that dialogue about, okay, so you do want to go on assignment. Looks like you do have some of the qualities. Where do you need a little bit more strength? And this actually comes with an activity workbook that helps you kind of make some plans about where you're going to make the gains that you need to make in order to be more successful when the time comes. Now, I always offer a word of advice. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know how to fake it on a self-assessment tool. So they can be manipulated. And what I mean by self-serve versus no-serve is if it's self-serve, you better be watching to make sure they do self-serve, because half the time there's no-serve and they don't do it. I know it takes time, and a lot of time people are in denial. And finally, how do you translate the information that people are getting out of that tool into the development of skills? These are things that we need to look at and try to address. Any questions so far? We tend to see that for companies that actually have an approach towards assessment, it depends on the corporate involvement. So we have the readiness questionnaires that could be something as simple as put on their performance appraisal. Are you interested in going on assignment? Is that something that you want to do when you go forward? Even using the cross-cultural adaptability as a self-assessment with absolutely no coaching, debriefing, or feedback, to having some feedback, to using tools that are very tightly tied to coaching, like the intercultural development inventory, which I'm personally very fond of. And then, of course, we have third-party assessment with no feedback to the company. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have third-party assessment with feedback to the company in a report with a thumbs up or a thumbs down as far as assessment. So this is kind of the scale. This is what's available, and many companies do many different things. Can I ask for a show of hands from those of you who actually have a client or personally do third-party assessment with feedback to the company? I'm going to guess nobody does it, but you may have a couple. Could you raise your hand? Come back to me, and raise your hands if you do them. No. Does anyone do any kind of assessment, anything either mentioned here or something else that they'd like to share with us? Feel free to raise your hand, and if you'd like to be unmuted, we will be happy to unmute you. Such a shy and bashful crowd. but at least you're all there. I'm not speaking to the air. Yeah, I would agree. Not many companies do it, and you're right. It does seem crazy not to do it. And you know, I know cost is an issue for a lot of companies. Again, you know, this can be costly. You can range between $25 to $35 or even $4,000. But we all know that the international assignment is called $1 million investment. And that's without quantifying the business objectives that are involved. So at the very least, why aren't we doing something around here which can be, you know, under $1,000 to get people thinking about where their strengths and weaknesses are. So it's, you know, it's an interesting conundrum. I mean, not sure why we aren't doing more. Anyway, this is just some basic information about the cross-cultural adaptability inventory. I've already talked to the 4 areas that it judges you on, not judges, but assesses you on. It is valid and reliable. I actually met with one of the developers, Judith Myers, this summer, and she's been working on a variety of other tools. One of the interesting things that we do is train HR on how to use the tool and how to have that conversation with the assignees. It may be something that, you know, you or your clients might be interested in doing. And again, I mentioned the action planning guide. So, you know, if I'm low on perceptual acuity, what should I be thinking of doing over the next 3 to 4 months before I volunteer for an assignment? So it's a really nice developmental tool as well. The intercultural development inventory, oh my gosh, I love this tool. We're actually doing a really fun project right now with a company in New Hampshire that is doing a big project in France. I just love this company. They're so much fun to work with. The VP of Global Ops is actually a woman. This is a big defense engineering company. They make big machines. And it's unusual to see a woman as global VP of Ops for a company like that. And the VP of HR, I actually met him at my presentation at a talent management firm, and he was very engaged in the conversation. He interrupted the conversation a lot, which of course made me feel like he was really engaged. So I was very happy. And what they have done is they have taken their 20 mission critical folks that are in charge of this big new French client that they have. They're going to be doing joint manufacturing in New Hampshire as well as in France. And they're taking their top 20 people, including U.S. and French, putting them through the IDI, and then they're going to be doing group training on it and further coaching. And so the IDI is a validated psychometric instrument. It's actually available in 12 languages, which was really cool. The French guys really like taking theirs in French. It is very detailed, and the report that comes back to you is extremely nuanced. And I did it myself because I can't, you know, go out there and talk to clients about something unless I've done it myself. So I did it myself, and, you know, being very multicultural and having worked and lived multiculturally, I really had a very high opinion of myself, and that sure brought me back down to earth. It was very eye-opening. And in fact, one of my clients who did it also shared with me his shock at where he came out to, because he has been traveling and working all over the world for years. We know that on the spectrum of culturalism, we go from monoculturalism to an intercultural mindset. And so I'm sure some of you have been experienced to this spectrum before, but we have from denial, there's no such thing as cultural differences. We're all humans. We all care about the same things, to polarization, which is basically, you know what, it's us versus them. You know, it's the Norwegians against the Americans. It's the Chinese. Why can't they just learn to do business with us Americans? After all, we are an American company. I've actually heard people say that, not only about the Chinese, but about any other culture. Then we have minimization, which can be explained as, yes, you know, there are differences between us, but really the problems that we're having isn't because they're the Indian culture versus the British culture versus the French culture. It's more the fact that, you know, we have different job function capabilities, or because of time zone differences, for example. So it's minimizing the importance of culture. Acceptance is really the first major walk into the intercultural mindset, and that is where you accept that there are some significant differences, and you are starting to make and bridge the gap between yourself and the others. I was disappointed to find that I was here in acceptance, and so was this colleague of mine, or not colleague, a client of ours, who does a lot of work in China, Latin America, and Africa, and has, you know, been international. He's Hispanic himself, and we were both talking about, wow, I thought I was at adaptation, and the truth is that it takes a certain amount of practice to be able to translate the acceptance and the understanding of the differences into the actual skills that allow you to adapt your work style to be effective. And that's really the end game. That's really what we're all looking for. We're looking for that ability to change. Now, I refer to Paula Caligiuri's very, you know, impressive work that she's done in a recent book that she wrote, and she articulated something which for me, was the first time I came across this way of looking at culture, where she says, look, there's three ways of dealing with culture. There's certain situations where you don't want to change how you're operating culturally. And a good example of that is when there's safety or quality issues. So we're not going to compromise on safety and quality issues in order to meet the other culture halfway. The second skill that truly culturally agile people have is cultural assimilation, in the sense of they will do things the way that's best done in that culture for certain things. So if you're going to give feedback to a colleague, you're going to do it differently in Japan and China than you would in the U.S. In the U.S., you may just turn around and tell your colleague in a group meeting, you know, I know you're really excited about this topic, but let's give someone else a chance to talk. And you know, somebody might get a little embarrassed if they're American, but, you know, in Asia or China, that might be like a complete face loss. So you might want to do something like that, you know, separately. So that's assimilation, where you would actually contain your normal way of managing or working and do it completely in the other way. Now, the third outcome of a truly culturally agile person is the ability to do cultural integration, so to do an integrated response that takes a little bit of one culture and a little bit of the other culture and comes up with a brand new solution. And so a great example, and I know that our client Anadarko is either he's on the call from Mozambique or he's going to be listening to the recording. So hi, Carlos. I do want to, you know, give some kudos to them, because they realized when they were doing a lot of work with Libya and other African countries that they had a lot of Muslims coming into their offices, and, you know, they needed to pray during the work day. And so while, you know, in the United States we keep religion very separately from work, they realized that there was a need to adapt, and they put into place a prayer room for them to, you know, with the carpets, clearly indicated where Mecca was, which direction Mecca was, so that people could pray. And then there was a little bit of integration and adaptation even further. There were groups within the company who were American who said, you know, we would like to be able to use that room for, you know, our own personal, on our off time, religious needs as well. So a solution for one cultural group actually ended up benefiting other cultural groups. And so what we see is this adaptation that allows us to be truly effective and inclusive and create the kind of work environment that we want. Questions or comments? Yes, John, you're absolutely right. The problem is that many companies do see this as a very soft, not hard, issue. You know, and I don't go very much into culture here in this presentation. I spent a lot of time on some of the other risk factors. I think, just to give you a cultural example of why cultural training is important, I can't imagine anybody here not having heard about the issue that a lot of people have when working with India, where they say yes, but they don't really mean yes. Feel free to raise your hand if you've heard that before. I have not been to a session on India where I haven't heard a Westerner say this. Exactly. We hear it all the time. And the reason is because they're very indirect communicators, they're very hierarchical, they're very risk averse, and so you know what, in those kinds of contexts, people are not going to say yes. A company once told me that their team in India was actually altering the research data slightly so as not to make their boss look bad. Face-saving issue. But very detrimental cost to the organization. And this, you know, most Americans or Westerners would look at this as deception or dishonesty. But from their perspective, this is a matter of respect. We, as the underlings, do not disagree with the overlings. So in order to be effective, we have to really culturally change how we operate. And this is where the money lies. This is where the success lies. You're outsourcing to India. You're doing your manufacturing in China. You want it to be effective. You need to have the cultural competency to hit the ground running and to be able to navigate through all of those differences. And you know what? It's up to us as HR and up to us as consultants to be able to articulate that effectively to our clients so that they can make the pitch internally. And some of the health risks associated with some of these cultural gaps on assignment are really a lot of irritability, especially during that culture shock period. Homesickness, there's physiological stress reactions, compulsive behavior, a lot of anger. A colleague of mine used to say, whatever you do when you're under stress, you're going to be doing it during culture shock. So if you're a crier, you're going to cry. If you're a sleeper, you're going to sleep. If you're a screamer, you're going to scream. And this makes for a very unpleasant employee, and it makes for a very unpleasant work environment. The local nationals who are working with that assignee often struggle a lot. And more of the very forward-thinking companies, I'm talking to a Danish company right now that's thinking of saying, look, I want to spend money on training that expat. Sure, we're not going to cut back on that, but I want to invest on a short training for the locals that he's going to be reporting to so that everybody can meet halfway. And I really find that tends to be a very progressive way of looking at it. Because there are a variety of risks of the organization that we need to be considering. There's obviously the dangerous or high-risk location, but as I said at the beginning of the session, sometimes there's the dangerous or high-risk assignee that's not going to a dangerous location. We also have the discrepancy to the home culture. Sometimes the danger is that it's very, very different. But we often anticipate those differences more and put more energy into solving that. And sometimes the similarities to the home culture can be a bigger stumbling block. So we have had situations where people moving just from the U.S. to Canada or Canada to the U.S. have had major cultural adaptation issues. It's a lot more subtle and people don't expect it. Similarly, North Americans, well, I know Mexico is North America. I mean, the U.S. and Canada relocating to London or Australia or vice versa. The assumption is English speaking, we can handle it, it's not going to be that different. And it is. And so these can be risks to the organization as well. And then again, the dangerous or high-risk assignee or the idiosyncrasies of the family. Any questions? Concerns? No? Okay, we're approaching the end. And then I'm going to open it up for questions or let you disengage. I only have a few more slides left. So if you recall the slide that I put up at the beginning, which had the 4 quadrants with the major issues, the safety and security, physical health being the obvious, predictors of success or predictors of risk, and then behavioral health and cultural competency, which I think are very closely aligned. I want to just define cultural competence for you. You know, it's the ability to successfully navigate a different cultural reality, and it's applying that cultural knowledge into the new workforce and in the new marketplace, really impacting the ability to achieve your goals and objectives. It requires awareness, self-awareness, and other awareness. It requires knowledge, and it requires skills. And, you know, if our R&D team were doing this presentation, Jean or Danielle or anyone else on the team, they would tell you that our focus is always, in every session that we do, to really develop skills, to make it very interactive, because that's how adults learn best. And I remember one of a client that I'm very close to, we had a big debate years ago, because he was like, I really don't want to spend too much time on history and geography on the training. And, you know, history has a huge impact on culture. And when we talk about knowledge, we have to have a knowledge of the history of a culture. You know, the Opium Wars impacted China's ideas about the West. Gandhi and the British dominance, or whatever the correct sovereignty in India, impacted the view of the West. So understanding history is important. Also understanding that countries like India, their religion with 80% of them in Hinduism, that is 4,000 years of religion and history impacting culture. Similarly, China, Confucianism, 5,000 years. So understanding history and geography and the environment enables us to, one, engage people more actively, and by engaging people more actively and more knowledgeably, we're able to develop deeper relationships. And that enables us also to modify our skill, our work style preference to be more effective from a skill perspective. And so cultural competency has to be very thoughtfully developed at an individual level, at a team level, and at organizational levels. And I think this is really what we're seeing to be more and more addressed now in the 21st century than it was 20-some years ago when I first started, and I felt like I was speaking into the wind, and people were like, what are you talking about it? And now I hear companies are really investing. Because the truth is that internationally, unlike in the U.S., most of the trust piggy banks are half empty or completely empty. In the U.S., we're a meritocracy, and we believe that people are all competent and all good and all ethical. And unless someone proves us wrong, we really trust the people that we come across. For example, nobody said, to my knowledge, and Jean can interrupt me if it's true, if I'm not saying the truth, nobody said, who is this Mercedes D'Angelo doing the presentation? Can you send me the bio? I want to check it out before I attend. I know a lot of you know me, but for those of you who don't know me, you assumed, you know, she must know what she's talking about. She's with cultural awareness. We know that. But in other parts of the world, when I get up and do a presentation like I did in Bucharest a few months ago, you know, I start with, what is my background? What are my credentials? What's cultural awareness's background? Because a trust piggy bank is empty, and I need to put deposits in there so that I can raise my credibility. And status is very important, and where you studied and who you know. So how you're perceived is going to be very different internationally. And if we don't have cultural competence, and if we are not operating by minimizing the risk of the assignee is going on assignment, and not only is he not making deposits into the trust piggy bank of your local clients, your local colleagues, your local joint venture partners, God forbid, your local government, but they're making withdrawals. And that's a big risk to your organization. Years ago, a Canadian company did a third-party assessment on an assignee going to Vietnam. The assignee was, the assessment was no, do not send this assignee. The assignee was from Quebec, and he blamed it on the therapist slash assessor who was Parisian, Frenchman who spoke French and living in Quebec at the time. So we assigned, the company I used to work for at the time, assigned the Quebecois assessor to do the assessment. Second assessment came back with exact same results. This guy is not a good person to send. Unfortunately, at the time, this telecom company had enough, this guy was senior enough to have enough pull power that he went on assignment anyway. 4.5 months into the assignment, he was sent back by the government of Vietnam because he had offended them in the newspapers in a quote. He was completely culturally insensitive. He was extremely opinionated and rigid. He did not have the flexibility and the openness to understand that his style had to be very different in a country like Vietnam, especially Vietnam, 18 years ago. There's been a lot of change since then. The cost of the organization was huge. They were not allowed back in for many years, and they lost a lot of ground to other companies. So I bring this to you, even though it's just one case. How many cases do we know where, or rather, do we not know of, where this type of extreme highs and lows are taking place? And so there's lots of services that go in to support the assignee and minimize risk. And these are not only pre-departure, but post-repatriation as well, where we know that, that the risk is existing as well. So these are just some of the ones that I can think of. I would add that in benefits, expatriate assistance programs, just like EAPs that a lot of companies have domestically, are of great value as well, especially those that have counselors who are aware of the cycle of adaptation and culture shock, and so aren't misdiagnosing culture shock as depression or anxiety. That can be very valuable as well. So in conclusion, I think that developing global competence is probably one of the areas where you can have a very bona fide, acceptable approach to managing risk. It's important to define it. It's important from the very beginning to be recruiting people with international experience, to develop a global mindset within your organization. As I mentioned before, let's not be just event-focused, doing a cultural coaching or training before an engagement. I know that some of our clients represented here are doing group trainings. Ongoing support is really important. And I think it's important for leadership to walk the talk. And then, of course, addressing the 4 quadrants that we talked about, so behavioral health, physical health, safety and security, as well as cultural competence. So I'm a little bit over my 1.5-hour mark. Those of you who may have to go, and I know John had to leave, but feel free to move on. I want to thank you for your time. But I'd also like to stay on and invite any of you who have any questions, concerns, whether it's how to approach it with your client or with your company or anything about what I've just presented. Please, we'll open the mics and let you ask your questions. Yes. Hello? Is there a question? Okay.
Hey, Mercedes, this is Gene, and I really like the part of, the three part when you move to another culture or working with another culture of what things you need to change about yourself in order to fit in, what things you must minimize and keep the same, and what things you integrate. And what that reminds me is that very common prayer we have on our refrigerator, and please help me, but it's God help me to have the courage to change the things I can, the serenity to accept the things about me that cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I find, and I find that quite fascinating because that's applied in so many of my adventures overseas that to be successful, you really have to know and be aware of these things I need to alter in a culture. These things I can't because it's going to sacrifice the corporate culture or our integrity or branding or safety and security, and then what things can we actually integrate together, and that takes a lot of time to know, how to throw that ball back and forth and so forth. And I think it's very valuable to have the cross-cultural training so that people can be aware of that. That's that first step. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
Thanks for making that correlation, Gene, because I had never actually put that together, but you're absolutely right. That's a really good metaphor for it. I think it's interesting. Most of you are still on the line, and I'm not sure if it's because you just want to catch any other questions that might come in. I want you to feel free to ask your questions, regardless of whether you think I may have referred to it earlier and you may have missed it. I don't care repeating myself, and I can always add a different lens to it. But I think people tend to learn a lot from the Q&A sessions. So I'd really like to invite you to just be daring and jump in there. Have any of you actually taken the CCAI or the STAGE, which is a self-assessment for global endeavors, or the IDI, or any of these tools, the OAI? I know there's a whole bunch of assessment tools. Any of you done it yourselves? You can put your hand up and we can do a little poll. Interesting. No one. Well, I would love to give you an opportunity to do so. I don't know if that's possible or not, but certainly if it's something that you or your client are interested in, let us know and we can see what we can do for you. There's a lot of research you can do online also on these tools. And some of these tools are very interesting. Like the IDI, you can actually assess it vis-a-vis the team. So you can plot the team's results around each other. And, we're partnering with a client and doing, another company that does an e-learning tool, which we're making available to our clients. And it also has a cultural assessment tool, which allows you to plot your results against different countries and also allows teams to plot their results against each other. we just recently established this relationship so that we could have a wider variety of solutions for our clients, including e-learning. So another thing another kind of tool that's out there that, kind of helps the self-awareness process, which is the first starting point for really growing your own cultural competency. One thing I did forget to say while you're thinking of your questions, I don't see any hands up yet. In that slide, I'm going to go back since you guys are so patiently waiting here. Oh, I have to go back really quickly. On this scale right here, I found this very interesting. In order to move from one end of this scale to the other, it pretty much takes 40 hours of concentrated attention and effort, actually 40 to 60, but let's say 40, to move from this point of denial to the point of polarization. So what does that mean? Does that mean you got to do 40 hours, 40 times, 200 hours of training to get to to become interculturally competent? No. What it means is that you need to make a thoughtful and deliberate effort to gain cross-cultural competency, which means that it could be a training session, it could be some coaching, it could be reading on your own, it could be talking to your colleague in India, Skyping with him or her, and asking them questions. I mean, one of the best gifts you'll give yourself is getting close to one of your international colleagues who can give you feedback after a session or who can help you prepare, who you can run your ideas by, and just establishing that intimacy where you can get some really good feedback. Every minute you spend with that person counts towards your 40 hours. It could be deliberately saying, telling your manager, I'd like to lead the next virtual meeting as part of my effort to grow my cultural competency. I want to prepare for it. I want to talk to all the people who are going to be participating. I'm going to let them know what my goals are. I'm going to set up my agenda with enough time for people to review it, and I'm going to manage this in a culturally appropriate manner. And for you to do the research that you need in order to run that virtual conference call effectively. The hours that you put in towards that in that conference call, and then debriefing it later with your manager or with your colleague, go towards those 40 hours. The point is, what you need is thoughtful and deliberate effort to move from one point to the other. Any last questions? Well, I would want to thank you for your time. I want to also wish you the best of luck in your own personal cultural competency development journey. It's going to be different for every single one of us. And if there's anything I can personally do to help you, if there are any questions that you'd rather just ask me one-on-one, please note my contact information below. We can also make the presentation available to you as a PDF if that's what you'd like. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. I know how busy you are, and the fact that you took the time out means a lot to all of us. Have a great day. Goodbye.